In this video, I will introduce you to Wyse ThinOS 9. In this video, since there are significant changes, I'm going to spend time walking you through the new local client GUI interface. So ThinOS 9 is an update. You may have been using ThinOS, a previous version. 8.6 was a previous release. In this release, we're going to focus on optimizations for Citrix, adding workspace app, browser content redirection, EDT, and Skype support, and a lot of the same features that you've grown to know and love in the previous versions of ThinOS. So the first thing you'll notice when you start up a ThinOS 9 is the first boot wizard. This wizard is really well done. It takes you through allowing you to select your language, select your broker, select the time zone. You can see here I'll select the time zone. Allows me to select the network. I'll choose my local network. And then I have the option to import a configuration from a WMS server. Again, I'm going to skip that for now. We're not going to use WMS till really to the end of this video. And then it gives me the option to here set up my broker server. And again, I'm going to go ahead and skip that for now. So now let's go ahead and look at the local interface. You can see with ThinOS 9 significantly changed and really improved and modernized over previous generations of Wyse ThinOS. If you look under System Setup, Admin Policy Tool is actually now a local capability to set a lot of things that previously you would have done through an administrative console. If I click on Advanced in Services, you can actually see inside of here I have the option to enable VNC, and I'm going to go ahead and do that off the bat. I'll enable VNC, I'll set a VNC password, and then I'll make sure that I have the ability to control the device. This is one thing before in previous versions would have required a centralized management server to do this. So now I can do that through the Admin Policy tool. I'll go back into the Admin Policy and I'll do one other thing that typically would have required central configuration, and I'm going to go ahead and set a security mode. So you can see the account privileges here. I'll go ahead and enable admin mode, set the privilege on the device to low to lock it down, and then set a local admin password on the device. And I'll use that later as I log in, and you'll see the system is locked down. So now my system, using that local admin policy, I've enabled VNC, and I've locked it down to privilege none and set the local admin mode. So I'm going to go ahead and VNC over to the device. So I'll start up my VNC viewer. I'm just using Tight VNC that I've downloaded on the machine, and I'll confirm the address that I want to VNC. And I'm using VNC. It just is a good way to get a remote control over a ThinOS device, and it gives me a clearer picture than my capture card that I'm using there. So here I can see my VNC to that same device. And now let's go ahead and walk through some of the local client interfaces. If I go under System Setup, you can see here it's locked down because I did set privilege to none. So I need to right click, go to admin mode, and enter the local admin password that I just set through the admin policy tool. And now I'll go ahead and I'll leave that window open so that the privilege is high. And now we can look at some things. So if I look under, I'll go ahead and go under the system setup. But before I do that, I want to compare that. I brought over this is a ThinOS 8.6 system. You can see here under central configuration, I just want to show you some of the differences here. Under central configuration for ThinOS 8.6, I had my file server option where I did my INI files, and I also had for WMS and WDM. On the ThinOS 9 box, there is no option for INI files. The one and only central way to manage it is through a WMS server. Let's cancel. We'll come back to that later as we go into this. So let's go ahead and click in and look at some of the local things. You can see under troubleshooting tool, there's a lot of nice tools that are here. You can see I can do things like export the system log. I can export settings. I can look at the performance monitor on the system. This is great for troubleshooting. If I've got issues in my remote desktop, I can really focus in and see if there's maybe a bottleneck in the CPU and memory on the thin client, or if it's into the VDI session. I can capture network traces and wireless traces to the USB drive. I've got a ping utility, a trace route utility, and there's even a simple telnet application built into the local interface under the troubleshooting capabilities. Let's go ahead and go back and look now, particularly under the system tools. You can see here I've got my options where I can certificates and packages. These are the applications. So in this version, I've got JVDI and Citrix as the only packages available. And now let's look under remote connections. Remote connections is where you would set your application broker. You can see in here in this version, ThinOS 9, the only broker option I have is Citrix. If you look over at my ThinOS 8.6, and just for comparative purposes, if you remember that, if you look under remote connections, you'll see I've got numerous other broker types. And you can expect that in oncoming releases to have more broker support in ThinOS 9, but for this release, it is focused on Citrix. So we'll go ahead and now we'll look under the VPN manager. This is a simple Open Connect VPN. It gives you the ability to make an Open Connect connection onto a device. You can see display locally. I can change things like the orientation, or I can click here and see the resolution, and I can adjust that locally on the device. Peripherals, under the peripherals you can see information. I can adjust settings related to the keyboard, to the mouse, the audio settings. Under the audio settings you can actually see there's a simple recorder, so I can test the audio of the system. I can do a record and play that back. I can adjust my serial settings. And then under camera, this one's actually very useful. I'll typically do a preview in here if I want to test if my local camera is recognized locally before connecting into my Citrix session. Now going back in here, you can see under printer setup, I can locally define ports. So this would be a locally defined USB printer. I can do LPD printing. I can do SMB printing. And then under options, I can actually define which locally defined printer is going to be the default inside the session. Okay, we've already talked about the admin policy. Let's go back to the remote connections, and let me show you defining a remote connection. Now I mentioned Citrix is the only one available. Here you can see here's actually a storefront site that I'm going to use. So this is in my local lab environment. So I'm going to use the workspace app mode, and then I'm going to go ahead and put my broker server here, which is just this HTTPS //:srvr 08-citrix.demolab.csg.dell.com. So I'm putting my full URL there in workspace mode. Under the options, I'm going to go ahead and pre-populate my login domain of the demo lab. So that'll be there. So all I'll need to do is username and password. And now it's asking if I want to reboot, but I'm going to go ahead and delay the reboot because my broker URL was HTTPS. I am going to need I'm going to need a security certificate. So here's that URL that I'm using. The easiest way to get that certificate is actually just to go ahead and go out to a browser. So here I put that URL into Chrome, and you can see the certificate there, and then I can actually just copy it to a file. And I've went ahead and exported that to a thumb drive. So now let's go back to the device, and you can actually see here, if I look under System Tools, under the certificate options, here's where I can import that directly from that thumb drive. So I've inserted my thumb drive, click on Import, and I should find that certificate, which I named the same as my server there. Again, typically a lot of this I would be doing this centrally with the Wyse Management Suite, but I wanted to give you, since this interface was new, the opportunity to see the local interface. Now that that's there, let's go ahead and shut down the system and restart it, because it wanted to reboot before, but now it has the new broker information as well as the required security certificate and the domain. Now it's rebooted, and I've actually started my VNC connection to it, and I'm going to go ahead and log in with my user. And since I am using, this is the new workspace mode, so you can see that launch. This should look very familiar if you're using workspace mode. And under my apps, I'll go ahead and launch my app of Notepad. And Citrix Workspace is connecting to my server. I like that app, so I'm going to go ahead and you can see under Notepad, I can actually add that to my favorites. So now when I click over into my home page and move this out of the way, I've got IE and Notepad, so I'll go ahead and launch IE and make another published apt connection into my Citrix environment. So I'll go ahead and close those and log off. And that will bring me back to here. So one last thing I'm going to show you here. Again, it's still locked down, so I need to remember to go into the admin mode that I had set at the early part of the demo. And then I want to show you the central configuration, because again, even though I've been showing you how these settings can be done locally, the majority of the time they'll be done through the Wyse Management Suite. So here under central configuration, you'll see the option where I can have a group key and I can enable advance. In this case, I'm using a WMS Pro on-prem server. So I need to give it a group key and I need to give it to that WMS server information. So I'm going to go ahead and just enable those custom dhcp option tags so that my device can get those information. And then I'll just blow that up here so you can get a good screenshot of those. You can see I'm using 4 custom option tags to tell it my server and group key. So now that those options are there, if I go ahead and shut down and reboot my device, this time it'll actually populate itself with the central configuration information for my WMS suite server. So it will reboot here. And you'll see this connecting here. And it's ready to log in. And I'll go ahead and switch over to the VNC view. And if you just go back in here and switch into admin before I do that, and I can show you that under central config, the server has gotten the information for my server. And you can see that there, and we can click and reveal that information if we want it. So hopefully this video was useful. With ThinOS 9, there are a lot of changes. The GUI was a little bit different than what you may have seen in previous versions of ThinOS. So I wanted to spend time with you just walking you through the new interface. Thank you very much, and have a great day.